Chapter 1: Mud and Silence. The trenches had their own stench. Not just mud, not just blood, not just the rot of men and horses left half-buried when the ground swallowed them whole. It was all of it, mingled into a damp rot that clung to the back of the throat. When Henry woke to it, he often wondered whether he'd actually been asleep at all, or if the gasping stink simply carried him through hours without time. This morning, if it was morning, there was mist, pale and heavy, pressed low over the trenches. The duckboards were slick, mud bubbling between their slats. Rats moved confidently along the beams, swollen with meat, and Henry tried not to think about what meat. Private Henry Fletcher had stopped caring about dirt long ago. His tunic had hardened into a stiff shell, mottled with patches of darker filth where water and blood had dried together. His boots stank of mildew. His rifle was clean, though. Always clean. You could die in this place for nothing, but never because your weapon jammed. He sat with his back to the sandbags, breathing shallow, the air cold enough to sting but damp enough to weigh him down. Somewhere far off, guns thumped in rhythm, dull heartbeats across no man's land. The Germans had been quiet in the night, unusually so. That silence was worse than the shelling. Silence meant they were thinking. Henry rubbed his eyes with dirty knuckles. He had dreamed again, Margaret's voice, high and clear, cutting through the dark like a hymn. She had been standing in their mother's garden, the lilac bush flowering even though it was autumn, and she had waved at him, calling him home for supper. He had almost believed her. Almost. When he woke, her voice stuck in his head, and it made the silence of the trench unbearable. Fletcher. Henry turned his head. Corporal Davies crouched near the firing step, cigarette glowing faintly in the murk. His face was little more than planes of shadow, eye-sunken hollows. Stand to! Henry pulled himself upright, bones aching. He climbed onto the firing step and raised his rifle over the parapet. The fog ahead was dense, hiding the churned stretch of no man's land. The corpses that had been there yesterday, British and German alike, were gone from sight, but he knew they hadn't moved. They were still out there, watching, swollen faces pressed into the earth. The line stirred sluggishly, men pulling themselves up like half-dead things. Some coughed, some cursed softly. None spoke above a murmur. Henry watched the mist, waiting for shapes. His heart beat louder than the distant guns. Every broken silhouette could be a soldier crawling forward. Every twist of fog could hide bayonets. Nothing came. Hours, or minutes, passed. Time in the trenches was elastic, stretching and snapping, never measurable. The fog lifted slowly, unveiling the land between. Henry wished it hadn't. No man's land was torn apart. Wire-tangled like bones. Craters filled with rainwater glistened. Bodies were slumped in obscene positions, some headless, some face down with packs still strapped to them. A horse lay nearby, legs splayed rigid, its belly slit by shrapnel so that crows picked at the pale rope spilling free. Henry looked away. When the stand-to ended, men slipped back down, rubbing their hands, muttering for tea that wouldn't come. Davies barked at them to keep alert, but his own shoulders sagged with weariness. Henry sat again, lowering his rifle across his knees, and tried not to think about Margaret. But she came anyway. She always did. Her face floated in his mind, pale, framed with dark curls. She had been 12 when he last saw her, tugging at his sleeve at the station, asking when he would come back. He had promised her by Christmas. That was 2 Christmases ago. He still saw the way her lip trembled when he boarded the train. Henry, she whispered now, her voice cutting through the noise of boots and coughing. He looked up sharply. Nobody was near him. Davies had moved on. The others huddled in 2s and 3s. But the voice was clear, right behind his ear. Henry, you must wake up. His breath caught. The mud swam under him, the trench shifting. He blinked, and the sound was gone, leaving only the scratch of a rat in the corner. He pressed a filthy hand to his face. Maybe he hadn't slept properly in weeks. Maybe he was losing his mind. Men went cracked here all the time. Some started laughing in the middle of bombardments. Some walked out into no man's land like sleepwalkers, as if they were crossing a street back home. Henry clenched his jaw. He wasn't one of them. Not yet. That afternoon, they carried stretchers. Word had come down the line, casualties from a night raid needed moving. Henry was among those ordered. He hated stretcher work. It meant seeing the faces. It meant touching the bodies. The first man they lifted had no legs. The tourniquets were tight, but his face was already ashen, eyes glassy. He moaned weakly, breath bubbling. They slid him onto the stretcher, and Henry took the rear handles. The trench narrowed in places, boards broken. Mud sucked at their boots. The wounded man whimpered each time the stretcher jolted. Henry kept his eyes fixed forward, breathing through his mouth. The second man was already dead when they reached him, though the sergeant barked at them to carry him anyway. His skull was split open, the helmet dented inwards like a crushed tin. His brain glistened, pale and obscene. Henry swallowed hard as they lifted him. The worst was the boy. 17, maybe. Blonde hair clotted with mud. Both arms gone, torn off above the elbows. His chest hitched in shallow breaths, and his lips moved silently. Henry leaned down without meaning to, catching the whisper. "Mother, mother." Henry's stomach turned. He wanted to tell the boy something kind, but his throat wouldn't work. The boy's eyes rolled back, and his chest stilled. By the time they laid him on the stretcher, he was gone. Henry wiped at his mouth with the back of his sleeve. The mud tasted of iron. That night, the shelling started. It began with one gun, distant, then another, then dozens. The air shook with it. The trench rattled. Men pulled blankets over their heads as if that would stop steel. Henry pressed himself into the earth, teeth chattering. Shells screamed overhead and burst in showers of dirt and fire. Sandbags shredded. Splinters flew. A man near Henry screamed as shrapnel tore through his thigh. Another was buried half under a caved-in wall, his boots kicking until they stopped. Henry's ears rang. His body shook with every impact. He tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Instead he heard Margaret again, faint but steady, whispering to him through the thunder. "You're safe, Henry. It's only a dream. You must wake up now." He squeezed his eyes shut. The sound of tearing metal roared in his skull. He almost believed her? Almost. But when the bombardment eased, when the air cleared enough to breathe again, the trench was littered with groaning men, splintered rifles, mangled corpses. Henry opened his eyes and knew he hadn't woken at all. Later, when the moon rose pale above the ragged line, Henry found himself staring at the wire in no man's land. The dead were still there, half-lit, shadows against the cratered earth. He thought of the boy whispering for his mother, and of Margaret calling him home. His fingers tightened on his rifle. He wondered, distantly, if it would be easier to climb the parapet and walk until the bullets took him. But he didn't move. He stayed in the mud, where the rats scurried, where the stink clung, where dreams and waking bled together. And Margaret's voice followed him into what little sleep he could find. "Henry, please wake up. Please." Chapter 2: The Hollow Eyes. The rain didn't stop. It never truly stopped. When Henry opened his eyes, the trench was a river of brown water. Duckboards floated loose, sliding against one another like coffin lids. The men cursed as they bailed with mess tins, but their efforts were as useless as prayers. Henry sat with his back to the slick wall, rain dripping from his helmet brim, and tried to remember the feel of dry clothes. His body itched under the lice, crawling where they couldn't be reached. His stomach turned at the thin stew someone ladled from a pot that tasted more of mud than meat. Everywhere was grey. Grey mud, grey sky, grey faces. Henry. The voice cut through the patter of rain, soft, sing-song. He lifted his head sharply, eyes scanning the trench. The men nearby muttered over their food, too tired to notice anything else. None had spoken his name. He turned. And there she was. Margaret stood at the far end of the trench, small and pale in her summer dress, curls damp with rain. She looked so out of place, her bare feet sinking into mud that should have swallowed her whole. She raised a hand, smiling faintly. Henry scrambled up, heart slamming against his ribs. Margaret! She turned, stepping lightly along the trench, drifting just out of reach. Henry staggered after her, boots slipping. Margaret, wait! But when he reached the corner, she was gone. The trench stretched on, empty. Only a rat darted across the boards, its fur matted and black. Henry pressed a hand to his face. His skin burned. He wanted to shout her name, but his throat closed tight. He leaned against the wall, chest heaving, eyes stinging from more than rain. Fletcher! A hand gripped his shoulder. Henry spun, nearly raising his rifle. Corporal Davies stared at him, frowning beneath his dripping helmet. What the hell's wrong with you? Henry swallowed hard. I thought I saw. Davies narrowed his eyes. You keep your head together, Fletcher. Don't start losing it now. We've enough bloody lunatics already. He stalked away, muttering. Henry sagged back against the wall, fingers trembling around the rifle stock. He tried to convince himself it was exhaustion. A trick of the rain. Nothing more. But he could still smell her hair, lavender, sharp and sweet. That night, Henry dreamed. He was in his mother's house, the fire crackling in the hearth. Margaret sat by the window, sketching with a stub of pencil. She looked older now, 15, maybe, her face thinner, eyes shadowed. Henry, she said, not looking up from her paper. Yes? You're not here. You're somewhere else. Somewhere dark. His throat tightened. I'm here now. She shook her head. No. You left me behind. You've been gone a long time. Father says you won't be coming back. Henry stepped toward her, but the floorboards sagged beneath him. He looked down. The wood was rotting, water seeping through, and beneath it, mud, endless and black, swallowing the house. Margaret! He lunged, grabbing for her arm. But she only looked at him, eyes pale as smoke. Wake up, Henry. You have to wake up before they bury you. The floor gave way. He fell screaming into the mud. And when he woke, his mouth was full of dirt. Shelling again. The trench shook, showers of earth collapsing in heaps. Henry clawed mud from his lips and ears, dragging himself upright as the bombardment thundered. Men shouted in panic. A boy screamed until a blast cut him off. The world was fire, black smoke, choking fumes. Henry staggered toward the firing step, heart pounding. He raised his rifle, but the fog ahead was a wall of fire. Shapes moved in it, human, inhuman. He couldn't tell. Someone grabbed his arm. It was McBride, his eyes wild. They're coming. Christ, they're already in the wire. Henry squinted through the smoke. Figures stumbled toward the trench, but they were twisted, broken. Some crawled on hands and knees, entrails dragging behind them. Some walked headless, groping blindly. The corpses from no man's land were rising, pulling themselves free of the craters. Henry fired, the rifle's kick slamming into his shoulder. A shape crumpled, but more came on, moaning like the wind through graves. McBride screamed beside him. "They won't die. They won't bloody die." Henry reloaded, hands slick with mud. He shot again, until the shapes blurred, until smoke stung his eyes so raw he couldn't see. When the bombardment lifted, the trench fell silent. Henry blinked through the haze. No corpses. No broken shapes. Only men, slumped in exhaustion, guns clutched tight. McBride was gone, vanished, or maybe dead. Henry couldn't be sure. He lowered his rifle slowly, chest heaving. His ears rang. His hand shook so violently he dropped the bolt. "Fletcher." The voice again. Clearer now, closer. He turned. Margaret stood at the parapet, her dress clean, her skin untouched by the rain. She reached a hand toward him. "Please," she whispered. "Please wake up." Henry staggered toward her, reaching out. And his fingers closed on sandbags. She was gone. Later, when the men huddled in the dugout, passing a bottle of gin between them, Davies eyed Henry across the flickering candlelight. "You fired into nothing," Davies said flatly. Henry's mouth was dry. "I saw them. Out there. In the smoke. They were coming for us." "You're cracking." Davies' eyes were hollow, his voice low but steady. "You keep that up, I'll put a bullet in you myself before the Hun does." Henry's face burned. "I'm not mad." Davies leaned close, the candlelight deepening the scars across his cheek. "We're all mad here, Fletcher. The only difference is who can hide it." The gin passed. The men drank in silence. Henry stared at the flame until his vision blurred, Margaret's face hovering in the smoke. He whispered her name, but no one heard. That night, Henry dreamed again. He lay in a hospital bed, sheets white and clean, sunlight slanting through the window. Margaret sat at his side, her hand in his. "Henry," she said softly. "Yes," he whispered. "You've been asleep for so long. They say you might never wake up." His heart stuttered. "I'm awake now." She shook her head. "No. You're still in the dark. Still in the mud. You have to fight your way back." He gripped her hand tightly. "Don't leave me." Her face wavered, dissolving into smoke. The bed melted beneath him. The sheets turned to mud. The sunlight dimmed into choking fog. Henry woke screaming in the dugout, and the men stared at him with hollow eyes. Chapter 3, Whispers in the Wire. The trench was quieter after the bombardment, but quiet didn't mean peace. Quiet meant waiting. Henry sat hunched on the firing step, rifle across his knees. The rain had slowed, but the mud still stank, thick and slick with blood. Somewhere in the fog, a crow croaked, then fell silent. The men around him were shadows, moving slowly, muttering in broken voices. They had grown thinner over the weeks, hollow-cheeked, sunken-eyed, uniforms clinging to their bones. Henry could hardly tell them apart anymore. Sometimes, in the half-light, he thought they weren't men at all. He rubbed his temples, trying to press away the ache behind his eyes. Sleep had become a cruel joke. Every time he closed his eyes, Margaret came. Sometimes she begged him to wake. Sometimes she accused him of leaving her behind. Sometimes she just stared, silent, her face pale and blurred, like a portrait left in the rain. The line officer passed by, boots splashing through the muck. His voice was thin, cracked with exhaustion. "Be alert. Expect movement at dawn." Dawn! Henry no longer trusted the concept. Light and dark bled into each other until hours lost their meaning. Still, he checked his rifle, wiped the damp from the bolt, and tried to swallow the knot of fear in his throat. That was when he heard it. At first it was faint, like the buzz of flies over carrion. Then clearer, whispers, threading through the wire. Henry stiffened. He raised his head. Across no man's land, the fog shifted, clinging to the rusted tangles. The voices came from there, low, murmuring, almost chanting. He strained to hear. Words slipped into his skull like worms. Henry. Henry. His blood ran cold. He turned sharply. Did you hear that? The man beside him, E. Miller, a broad-shouldered Yorkshire lad, gave him a dull stare. Hear what? The voices. Out there. They were calling my name. Miller spat into the mud. You've gone soft in the head, Fletcher. Wire doesn't talk. But Henry could still hear it, a susurrus winding through the fog. He gripped his rifle tighter, hands slick with sweat despite the cold. Henry. This time it was unmistakable. Margaret's voice, clear as a bell. He nearly scrambled over the parapet, but Miller shoved him back down. Christ, are you mad? You'll get your bloody head taken off. Henry gasped, his chest aching. The fog thickened, swallowing the wire, swallowing the voices. He pressed his hands to his ears, but Margaret's whisper called inside his skull. That night, Henry dreamed again. Not of the house, not of the garden, but of something different. He was lying in bed, but not in the dugout. The air smelled of disinfectant, sharp and sterile. Light flickered against white walls. Somewhere, a machine beeped slowly, steadily. Margaret sat at his side, older still, her face worn with grief. You're not there, Henry, she whispered. You've been here all along. But you won't open your eyes. His throat tightened. He tried to reach for her, but his arms felt pinned, heavy. She laid her hand on his chest. They're feeding you through tubes. They're keeping you alive. But your mind is stuck in the mud. The beeping grew louder, faster. Henry's heart hammered. Wake up, she begged. Before it swallows you whole. The sound turned into shellfire. The walls cracked, splintered, collapsed into mud. Henry screamed as the hospital dissolved, and the trench swallowed him again. When he woke, he wasn't sure if he had ever truly been asleep. The dugout was damp, lanterns flickering. Men lay huddled under blankets, twitching in restless half-sleep. Henry sat upright, his breath ragged. He thought of the beeping, of Margaret's hand, of the white walls. And then he thought of the wire, and the whispers. The following day, they were ordered to patrol no man's land. Henry's stomach turned when the sergeant announced it. 6 men, crawling through the wire at night, knives ready, listening for movement. Henry wanted to protest, but his voice stuck. Instead, he found himself outside the trench after sundown, boots sinking into the slime, the fog pressing close. The patrol moved in silence, crouched low. Every breath was loud as thunder. Henry's hand shook around the rifle. Shapes loomed, craters, wire, broken helmets half buried. And bodies. Always bodies. Some fresh, some half rotted, some little more than bone. Miller nudged Henry, pointing ahead. Movement. Henry squinted. A figure crawled in the fog, dragging itself on hands and knees. Its legs were twisted, broken. Its face was a white blur. Henry froze. It wasn't German. It wasn't anything human. The figure turned its head. Its mouth gaped, and in Margaret's voice it whispered, "Wake up." Henry fired without thinking. The shot cracked through the fog. The figure jerked, then collapsed. "Christ, Fletcher!" Miller hissed, grabbing his sleeve. "What the hell are you doing?" "That's one of ours." Henry blinked. The fog thinned just enough to show the body, a British uniform, sprawled in the mud, a gaping hole through the chest. Henry's stomach lurched. His rifle slipped from his grasp. Miller shoved him hard. "You bloody idiot! You've shot Davies!" The sergeant's body lay still, eyes glassy, mouth open. Blood soaked into the earth. Henry staggered back, hands shaking, bile rising in his throat. "No," he whispered. "It wasn't him. It wasn't." But the others were staring, faces pale with fury and horror. Miller's knife was half-drawn. "You've lost it," Miller spat. "You're dangerous." Henry backed away, trembling. "It W.